I am David Stein of Money for the Rest of Us.
And I'm Brett Stein of Money for the Rest of Us.
And today we're going to talk about 4 rules for building a sustainable wardrobe. Now, clothing might seem like an odd topic to discuss on Money for the Rest of Us, but I occasionally mention it on the podcast. I have loved clothes since first, second grade. Like I was always aware of what I was wearing. And as I've gotten older, I became even more aware of the cost of clothing, not just the price, but the time it takes to earn the money to buy the clothes, what is sometimes called the true cost of a thing, but also the cost to the environment. And I know, Brett, you've certainly liked clothes. I'd say you probably have way less clothes than I do. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've not always, I've been fascinated by fashion since I was in my teens. And that time in the 2010s, fashion was really sort of changing in the mainstream in a very interesting way. And I really got into fashion. But even when I first got into fashion, I was always very into used fashion. And I had loved vintage clothing when I was even younger than that. And so used clothing and sort of sustainable clothing sort of naturally came with my enjoyment of fashion to the point where I seldom to never buy anything new anymore. I'm always trying to think about where my clothes come from and how they fit into my footprint of the world around me.
That makes sense. So let's go through the 4 rules. And as part of that, we'll explore what does sustainable actually mean. And the first rule is to buy less. And from my perspective, that is a really, really important component to sustainability, to having less of an impact on the planet. One of my favorite economists is E.F. Schumacher, and he wrote one of his essays was Buddhist economics. And he says the aim of our consumption should be to maximize our well being with the minimum of consumption. So by buying less, we're talking about having clothes that we enjoy, that we feel really good wearing, but we don't have to have so many of them. And there's some ways we'll talk about to do that. But ultimately, I think we have to buy less. And one way to do that is to understand what you actually own. So I'm pretty detailed. So I have an actual spreadsheet, well, not really a spreadsheet, but a document that shows every piece of clothing that I own. So it's an inventory of what I own. I know when I bought it, I know where I bought it. And just going through that exercise helps me be mindful. Well, here's what I have. And I know what I have, and what I have is the things I actually like. And so if I don't like something, I get rid of it. But being mindful that way, knowing exactly what I have, makes it sort of more difficult to go out and just buy anything I want because I already know the specifics. And if there's a particular piece I'm looking for, I can take the time to research it, think about it, and ultimately to buy it.
Absolutely. And that can definitely be really overwhelming to know everything that you own. I remember a time probably about 5 years ago where I owned some 50 shirts. And so I didn't have a clue of everything I owned because I had just bought without really thinking about it and sort of just collected a lot of things and wasn't using them all. But now there's a ton of different websites out there and guides and challenges to really understand everything that you own to be able to get an inventory of that. That's things like Project 333 or the 10 by 10 challenge and so on and so forth.
Right. So I own about 150 items of clothes, which about 40% of them are used. We're going to talk about buying used. But certainly a key part of sustainability is to buy less things, be mindful about what we buy, and which leads us to our second point then is to buy better. In order to keep clothes, like I have garments that I've had for over a decade and still wear. And the way to do that is to buy better, to buy better quality things that are going to last. And one of the challenges with is fashion is figuring out, well, is this price more because it's higher quality or is it price more because they market the heck out of it? And then that's always a challenge, and which is why we need to research the garments, understand who's making them, what's the company, who's the designer, and what is their philosophy of fashion. Because there are brands out there For example, I like this shirt is Margaret Howe. I bought this used off eBay probably 6 or 7 years ago. Well, I've studied Margaret Howe for years. She's in her early 70s. She started out, her inspiration for clothes was a used shirt that she found. And so she's recreated that. But I understand that she's trying to be sustainable. And her philosophy is we should buy less, but buy better. And that's an important component.
Absolutely, and it can be really hard to understand that quality and the ethics of a company. And I absolutely think there's a lot to be said about companies that are transparent about how they're making their clothes, where their materials are coming from, what are their factories like. And it says something about the quality of an item of clothing if they're willing to put forth the effort to say that. And there are a lot of resources out there to also be able to understand how clothing brands are affecting the environment and the people and the planet around them. Two really good resources for that is a website called Good On You, where you can go and search some of your favorite brands, and they'll break down, they'll say, here's how we think this company is in regards to their sustainability. And there's also another website called Collective Fashion Collection, which is similar to that, having a collection of articles about brands that they admire and are doing a good job in being sustainable. And we'll link both of those in the video.
I think the other thing when we talk about buying better is it does cost more. And so shirts, shirt like this, I think I paid $80 off eBay for used. A new one is I think she's charging $300 to $400 for a shirt. It's in pounds, but I know that I'm buying it's that expensive because it's made in smaller quantities. It's very high end cotton, but just the finer weave of cotton, and so it's going to last for years. I mean, it hasn't really. I've had it 5 6 years. It looks the same, so it's not wearing out. And so when we think about the sort of the average cost of a piece, it might be more upfront, but if you can keep it for a decade, and it's something that you like, then it will it's worth it. So the average cost of the life on an annual basis is going to be much less. And another aspect of that is figuring out what you actually like. And so we need to try on a lot of clothes. So if you're visiting a store or you're visiting a city, go to the nicer stores. Go in, just try on clothes and see what higher quality garments feel like and how they fit on you so that you can kind of get a sense, well, I actually like this. And this is why it actually costs more money.
I like that. I was always really impressed that when you traveled more for work, traveling to these big cities like Los Angeles and New York, that you would go into these big department stores and you would just look at the clothes, you'd try them on, you'd feel them, and really start to understand, what weaves do I like? What materials do I like? What lasts better? And being able to think about that until the time you were ready to get an article of clothing, whether it be used or new. And I think that this feeds well into our third rule, which is to buy used. If you know what brands you love and that last, then you can buy them used. You can find them at consignment stores. You can find them on eBay. Some of those brands selling those clothes, such as Patagonia, might even have a secondhand store already set up on their website. And that allows you to be able to save costs while working in a more sustainable way. And the sad truth is that every year there's about 100 billion articles of clothing that are made. And within 12 months, 60 billion of those are within landfills. And so the more that we can buy used and find garments that are already loved and in good condition. I bought this shirt at a thrift store for less than $10, and it's one of my favorites. Then we can have a more sustainable wardrobe going forward.
That's interesting. When I was in college, I spent a lot of time going to vintage stores, actually just used clothing stores, Goodwill and things like that. And one of the sad things about the fashion industry, the clothing industry, is it's hard to find quality goods at just a typical used clothing store, so a Goodwill or something like that, St. Vincent de Paul, because fashion in of itself or the cost of clothing has fallen. It's one of the few things where the price of clothes over the past several decades have fallen in price, partly because the garments are made overseas, but more so it's because the quality is so much less than it ever was. They're made to be worn a few times and thrown out. Whereas 20, 30 years ago, you could go into a store like that and you could find clothes that were made in the 60s or 50s, and it lasted. The other thing is, as Japanese are really, really in to vintage clothing, and they bought a lot of clothes for years from U.S. stores, and then some of the best vintage stores are actually in Japan, and many of those clothes are U.S. made vintage clothes. What I have found a better source is actually going to vintage stores that specialize in it, and the prices are going to be higher than your typical Goodwill or St. Vincent de Paul. You might pay $30 to $50 for a piece, but it's 50 years old and the quality is there. Another site I've bought off eBay a lot. I have bought things off the Real Real, which I like, that has higher end used clothes. What's nice about that, it's they have very easy to return it if something doesn't work out. But there are a number of sites. But ultimately, to figure out what it is to buy used, you need to know what fits you. What are your measurements? So if you have a favorite garment, now how does it fit from pit to pit? What about the shoulder to shoulder or the sleeve or the length? So okay, this is the size shirt that I know fits me well. So then when you're looking on eBay or some of these other sites, make sure there's measurements there. And then if it very close to the measurements that fit you, then you can feel confident buying with that. And then even for new clothes, if a site doesn't list out the measurements so you can know that it's going to fit, then you shouldn't buy from them, because the higher quality sites will list out the measurements of the clothes. It takes them way more time, but it shows that they really care about that piece, that they're willing to take the time to put the measurements so you know exactly how it's going to fit if you buy it.
Absolutely. That's a really wonderful point. And that gives confidence. I know people that are apprehensive of buying things used or buying things off of eBay. And the more you know going into it, the better off of an experience you'll likely have.
That's right. So let's go to our fourth point is to keep our clothes longer. It's probably the best way to be sustainable is once you've bought something, if you know that you like it, there's no reason it can't last for decades. So it could even be passed down to your heirs if it's that cool a piece. Clothes can last that long. They can last 50 to 100 years and still be very usable. And some of the ways to make your clothes last longer, when I was still an investment advisor, was going to client meetings a lot, I had to wear a suit. Now I hardly ever wear a suit. But instead of sending my suits to a dry cleaner every few weeks because they were wrinkled, I just bought a steamer. And then I could just steam out clothes, steam out the suit, get the wrinkles gone, and then I could keep wearing it. And what happens a lot is people wash their clothes too often. If you actually hang out your clothes, you hang out your jeans, and they're a higher pair of selvage denim jeans, for example, you don't have to wash them at all. You can just hang them out and have several pairs, and then in that way they last longer. So not washing clothes as frequently, getting a steamer, and that will help keep your clothes longer. And sometimes it kind of depends on where you live. If you live in a place that's a little more humid, that's hot, you're probably going to have to wash your clothes more than if you live out west in the U.S., where it's like us, where it's much drier. I think the other thing to keep clothes longer is learn how to mend your clothes. So something that I've been much more into the past few years is figuring out, okay, how do I actually hand stitch, repair certain clothes, such as pants or jeans. And so I have a pair of khaki jeans, for example, or a pair of khakis that I've had for well over a decade that I've learned to hand stitch patches in. And so that's an important thing. And something else I'm learning to do now that I really know nothing about, but I'm just learning, is how to darn a sweater. So I have a sweater that I bought used in Japan by Nigel Caborn that I love, but it's got a hole in it. So I'm figuring out, how do I darn that? And there's YouTube videos on how to do that. And so it's sort of the journey of keeping sustainable clothes. Learn how to fix your clothes, repair your clothes. And Laprel's been really good in helping repair some of the clothes that I just can't do that can be sewn on a sewing machine. But that's a really key point.
And there's some companies and brands that will even help you repair your clothes. I know Patagonia, if you are having tears in your clothing and your gear, that you can send it to them and they'll help you fix it, or they'll fix it for you for a low, and I think sometimes even no cost, which is a really wonderful thing, that they believe in their clothes enough that they say, hey, well, we think you should keep wearing this. We'll help you fix it so that you can keep wearing and loving it for decades.
So that then is our 4 rules: buy less, buy better, buy used, and keep longer. And the reality is, this is a journey. It's going to take years to kind of figure this out. As you try different clothes, you try different brands, you figure out what your style is, what works best. If you go in with the attitude that you're going to keep this item for many, many years, it helps us be more mindful of what we buy. And the really cool thing about keeping clothes for a long time is they form to you, and they become a party. They become a part of your story. And even if they get a little bit of stains, or the wrinkled or something like that, they're your clothes. And it's keeping them a long time, treating them well, buying higher quality, and often, if you can, to buy them used. That is a great way to build a sustainable wardrobe.
Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, please like it, and you can leave a comment. We'd be happy to answer. Until then, have a great week.